All right, well, that was great, Darryl. Thank you so much for the acronym RISE and for your love sandwich. I will remember that. Very, very creative. But I do appreciate your heart, bro. That was great. It really was. Put a lot of thought into that. So this morning we're looking at the journal, and this is really the last. This is the last workshop that we're doing in 2016. And we've been meeting really every month throughout the year. And we've covered the traditions, and we've talked about a whole lot of related material. And here we are, we're at the end of the year looking at the journal. And it's probably a good place to close out the year, because the journal is probably the most powerful tool that we have in our program. And for those of us who are in recovery, and I hope that's the vast majority of us here this morning, we have personal history with the journal. A lot of times I know that, particularly for those of us who've got a few years under our belt, there may be some hazing, some cloudiness around your recollections of your journal. So this morning I want us to try and relate in the first person as we look at this information with our own experience of doing the journal. All right, so let's start with the purpose of the journal. There's probably a lot of things that you can identify as purposes that we're attempting to connect with when we do a journal with somebody in the group. But these are just probably the most obvious and fundamental ideas. Raising the floor, lowering the ceiling. And this is something that's obviously it's a component of the journal, but you can use a lot of these ideas well beyond the actual functioning of a journal or the reading of a journal or really anything surrounding the journal. Look, when Darryl quoted Jesus' interaction with the rich young ruler, Jesus actually lowered the ceiling and raised the floor on that guy. All right? When you lower the ceiling, what are you doing? You're limiting the amount of airspace this person has in which to operate. When you raise the floor, you are creating a higher threshold for them to talk and for them to function. In other words, you're squeezing them. You're creating that sandwich Darryl was talking about. Now, it really is a love sandwich, right? Because everything we do in the group, everything we do in CR, everything that is going to come out of your journal is that idea of a love sandwich. So when you raise the floor and lower the ceiling, you want to make it harder for them to be dishonest. You guys get that? Now the reason being is because people who abuse drugs and alcohol are inherently dishonest. Now that's probably a news flash. But let me raise my hand as not a recovering liar, but an active liar. Okay, I'm still in the business of telling lies, folks. Standing up here doing this class this morning, I told a lie quite recently. How about you guys? All right? So, we have a real issue with the truth. So when we raise the floor and lower the ceiling, we make it harder for people to be dishonest. We want them in number 2 there to hit bottom. Now normally, most people have got an idea of what it means to hit bottom. For a lot of people, hitting bottom is quite literally falling, right? Which is what's happening when you're using drugs and alcohol. You are falling. The only thing is you're not aware of the fact that you're falling. Right? You're falling, but you feel okay falling. You actually want to continue the feeling of falling. Right? Falling is the whole point. I don't want to have my feet on the ground. I don't want to live in the real world. I want to live in this construct. And right, hitting bottom is boom, you come face to face with reality. And for almost everybody that hits bottom, it is an upheaval. It's a painful, incredibly difficult time. A lot of times hitting bottom for people is death. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about a little difficulty here. We're not talking about some hard times. We're talking like a time of no other in a person's life. Yeah. So in the journal, we want to simulate hitting bottom. You get the picture here? Writing a journal is an enormous upheaval in someone's life. It shouldn't be just some rote matter of course, some process. We don't ever want somebody to think that. Okay, now you're onto the journal section. Heck no. That's not what we're about. Writing the journal is an individual upheaval in the person's life. And we want them to be more aware of the things and the details and the characteristics of their drug past than they've ever been in their life at that one time. We want them to get in touch with the painful consequences of using. So by definition, this is a journey into the most painful parts of their life. Now, what happens generally with somebody who has experienced great pain in their life? What do they want to do with that pain? Forget it.
Medicate.
Well, they want to medicate, right? So that's part of forgetting it. But they want to put it behind them. Right? I mean, look, I run into people all the time and, say, yeah, look, I used to do this, but I'm better now. They're still using, but I'm better now. That's a little shot across your bow. Don't go there. Okay? I don't want to invite you into my life to start digging up stuff that I want to keep buried in the backyard. Right. We've got to get into the pain. It says cut through the noise. What we don't want in the journal is invite somebody to write a bunch of hooey.
Bunch of what, bro?
You'll never hear that from me again. I didn't say it. Yeah. We don't want people giving us some sort of amateur novel, right? I don't want you to show me how great a writer you are right now. Right. You might think, oh, this is my opportunity to impress everybody with my prose. I don't care about that. Here's what I want. I want you to cover what you used. You see, I remember when I was out there doing drugs, some things cost me more than others. Right. There were some things I used, they wrecked me. Yep. I mean, it was awful. I mean, I wanted to kill some people when I did LSD, and I came this close to doing it. I mean, it was insane. LSD was like living another life. I wasn't really too crazy about talking about that. I'm still not. It's like psychotic. I need to talk about the LSD because that's where the bones are buried. That's where the stuff in my backyard that I don't want to dig up is. Yeah. What you used. We want the details of the drugs. What happened? I don't really care about what you thought. I don't care about any larger vision you have of LSD as it affects the population. I'm not interested in that stuff. What I want to know is what happened when you used LSD, because we all know that LSD messes you up. And that's what I want to hear about, because you need to hear about that. You see, when we use drugs, we become two people. We become the Dave who used the LSD and did horrendous, hellified things, and the Dave who's sworn never to talk about that again. We become schizoid. A lot of people really do become schizoid as a result of using drugs. Mental illness is very often a direct cause, or using drugs is a direct cause of mental illness for a whole lot of people. And then the last thing we want, and this is where it gets really, 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 you're getting into the inner workings of somebody's past here. How did you feel? It's hard for me to talk about what I used, for sure. It's even harder for me to talk about lying in a gutter with my pants around my ankles, right? That's what happened. But now you want to ask me, how did I feel when I woke up and my pants were around my ankles?
Right. Come on, Dave. That's right. Yeah.
It's like, please don't go there. There's a whole room full of people here. I don't want anybody to hear. No, we need to go here.
Right.
Remember, we want to hit bottom?
Yes.
You see, nobody will get better on their own. You guys recognize that? I meet people and they feel like they've got a handle on things. I know what I'm doing. Can we relate? Yeah, I've been there. I tried everything under the sun except what needed to happen. I didn't want to try that. because I wasn't prepared to go that far. And that's why I never got better. That's why I never recovered. Until somebody took me there, I wasn't going to go there myself. All right? Recovery is like being born again.
Come on now.
It really is. It's like being born again. You have got to fight like crazy to come into the world of recovery. And the last thing is connect using with pain, theirs and others. See, what we want people to recognize is that when you use drugs, you experience pain. Now, you'll hear a lot of people say a whole lot of things that are useful for somebody as a tool of reminding them not to go back. Fear. Fear is useful. Fear is useful to stop people using again. Right? Wrong. Fear is useless. You know how many times I was afraid of doing something, but I did it anyway because I wanted to get high?
Yep.
Sure.
That's true.
I mean, for goodness sakes, fear was of no use whatsoever, man. I did outrageous things that most people, my wife does not, probably hardly any of what I used to do. She really doesn't. I mean, it's just night and day different from the world my wife lived and the world in which I lived. Yeah. My wife smoked a cigarette once. I mean, I don't know. That's my wife's life. Right. My wife is afraid of something, she doesn't do it. Me, I was afraid of something.
Talk your way to that thing.
Just roll right on by that.
Yeah.
That's a normal function of human interaction, right? Fear, it stops us from doing things, right, that we shouldn't probably be doing. But for those of us who are involved in drugs and alcohol, you quickly cross that threshold. Pain is the one thing that will bring us to our senses. Because we all experience pain, and we have got to deal with it. You don't have to deal with fear. Fear doesn't have any consequences. Pain has got consequences because you can't get rid of it. The best thing you can do is bury it. But it's still there.
It's true.
And a good forensic examination of that backyard will dig up that pain and find out that it's in perfect condition. It hasn't deteriorated at all. So, let's move on. Writing the CR journal. So, when somebody is about to write a journal, there's some things we need to have in mind, we need to be clear on so that we can help them as they start out writing this journal. So what should be in the journal? What they used, what happened, how they felt at the time. So we've talked about this. We just want specifics. I can't stress enough the importance of making sure that this is all that's in a journal.
Yes.
It's very, very difficult. It seems very simple. Yeah, I got it. What I used, what happened, how to... Look, you don't need to tell me again. Really, I'm sorry. You keep telling me this. I got it. 3 things. And then they bring in the journal. And what's not in it? What you used, what happened, and how you felt. What's in it? Well, my mother's, and then I bought this, and then I got this job. I mean, look, I don't care about that stuff. The 3 things that you needed to put in there, you didn't put in there. Because guess what? You weren't listening. And those of us who have any experience with recovery, especially if you've used drugs and alcohol, you know firsthand what it's like to not listen. All right, so it begins when they used drugs and alcohol for the first time. That's when the journal starts. It might be you stole cigarettes out of your uncle's truck. It might be like me. My parents used to have a real nice liquor cabinet. I went in there one day. I was probably 7 or 8 years of age. I opened up a can of Heineken. I took a slug. I was like, oh, this is awful. And then I thought, man, what am I going to do with this? Now they're going to find it. So I hid it. And I went back a week later. I'm like, I got to get rid of this. I never thought about pouring it down the sink. My mother would have caught me. So I'm like, I got to drink this whole thing. So I drank a whole can of Heineken over like 2 months. It's like, oh, jeez, I don't know what it must have been like. There was stuff growing in it or something. I was probably chewing that Heineken by the time we got to the end. It was like... Anyway, that was my introduction to drinking alcohol. And guess what? It can't have been that bad. Because look at me now. All right. So we want to see a progression. We want to see, where did you start? As I said, for me it was with that Heineken. Where did it end up? It ended up with me not able to have one beer. One beer and I was gone. Believe that? One beer, because I was so toxified with alcohol. I can't believe it, as I even tell you. I don't believe it. I was wondering, why am I getting drunk on one beer? What the heck happened to me, man? I can't hold my liquor. I felt like a punk. No, I did. Well, that's what happened. We want to see that progression, because you need to see the progression. You need to see how bad you are. You need to see in black and white the full totality of what this has cost you. We want details of experiences, including consequences relating to the usage. Don't leave anything out. Look, if somebody says, I went out, took my paycheck, cashed it, bought crack. Next day, I went to work. No. Hold on a second. You just alluded to something that almost certainly is loaded with details that you need to get into. We need details. We need specifics. Listen, there is no length limit on a journal. All right, you're going to stop at 10 pages. No. There's no length limit. If someone is writing details and it takes them 30 pages, more power to them.
That's right.
And frankly, that's probably what a lot of journals should be, because that's how much we used. Episode after episode after episode. I can't remember probably 90% of what I did. I don't remember it. Sometimes stuff comes back to me. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I just remembered that. That was insane. We need to get into the specifics, the details of what happened in the course of somebody's using. If you're 50 years of age and you're still using, and you started when you were 15, 35 years of using, for the most part, almost every day. How many details are we talking about? When somebody comes in and gives you a few throwaway events, they give you a few episodes. There you go, I give you some details. You're not giving me anything. This is about you. I need you to get in touch with the pain. It's not about making me happy or the other guys in the group going, yay, that was a good journal. We're not interested in that. I want to see you in touch with the pain, and the best way I know to do that is by getting you to go through the specific events and the details of what happened. Yeah. Right? It must contain pain, brokenness, surrender to the fact that they're powerless over drugs and alcohol. Look, don't expect to see a white flag in the journal. Don't expect to see someone raising the white flag and surrendering in the journal. Surrender in the journal is the severity of what they were doing, the severity of their circumstances. You get that? Don't expect somebody to say in their journal, I realized I was a broken down bum and alcoholic, and from that day on I swore I would never drink again. Next day I got up and I went and blew my paycheck again. Now that's a good journal right there. Right? That's a good journal. But don't expect to see white flags in the journal. At least the real thing. All right, the journal should be handwritten. Okay, in the last 20 years this has become real important, right? 20 years ago it wasn't a big deal because everything was handwritten, right? But today, it's not surprising to see somebody come in with a journal that's been put together in a word processor. Why do you think it's important that a journal should be handwritten? Joe.
Typing something, for me, typing something, when I type something up, I'm thinking presentation. I'm thinking doctoring stuff up, go back, I don't like this word, I don't do it fit. So I become more of an overseer of another story versus when I'm writing something with the pen that's coming out.
Okay, good. Yeah, Darryl, that's great, Joe.
There's also another dynamic into writing versus typing. That writing literally writes it on our hearts and minds as we write it. Typing doesn't have the same effect.
Absolutely. I mean, look, this is an enormous conversation, and we're not going to have it here today, but there is such a world of difference between writing something in your own pen.
Yep.
There was a time when people communicate. If they wanted to let somebody know something that they couldn't speak to them, they wrote them a letter. And on that letter, you got a real good idea of what they were thinking. Today, they send you a text or an email. And what is it? It's the most impersonal way of communicating. It means nothing. When somebody who sits down and writes something personally in their own hand,
Yeah.
Yes.
what Joe said is 100% right. They're not thinking, hey, I'm the clever author here. Let's do a spell check on this. The flow is really not in this paragraph. And how does this paragraph relate to the one preceding? I'm not communicating my ideas here. Let's start all over again. I mean, come on. That's not what we're after here. Write a paragraph, invest in that paragraph, and then say, this paragraph doesn't convey my ideas. Well, screw it. I've got a paragraph written already. I'm sticking with it. That's what I want. I want you to write. The pen needs to just be a tool, an implement of what's inside you. Just needs to flow. That's why we want it written in one sitting. When somebody says, yeah, I'm working on my journal, that's probably not something you want to hear. Yeah, I've been working on it for the last 3 weeks. So what are you doing? A little bit every evening? That sounds like a pretty ineffective journal right there. Somebody's doing a little bit when they've got time. Well, let me pick up where I left off again. Where was this? 1979? No, I'm still in 76. Let's just go to 84. I mean, we need someone to sit down and chronologically in their mentally just allow those recollections to pour out on the page. You've got a far better chance of getting reality when they do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It says, once completed, it should be closed and not opened again until it's read in the group. Why is that important? Yeah, Darryl.
Two temptations. One is to reread it and start editing.
Uh-huh.
The second one is, well, before I bring it to the group for the presentation, let me show it to a couple of friends first.
Yeah, how shrewd. Right? Has anybody ever seen that before? Can I just show you this before I read it? I'd like to show you my journal. Yeah, people said that to me. Plenty of people have said that to me. It's like, no, why don't we just all get a look at it together? We'll all learn about your journal at the same time. All right? I mean, look, you want to build this thing up. I don't want you to be intimidated. I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want it to be harder than it needs to be, but I want you to know it's a big deal.
Yes.
I want to create this sense of bottom. I want it to be seared into your memory. It's seared in my memory. The stuff I wrote in that journal, I hadn't divulged to anybody. I needed to do that very, very seriously. So when you write a journal, it needs to be a time like no other. A time of coming clean.
Yes.
You got your comeuppance
Come on now.
when you wrote your journal. Okay, so writing a journal. What shouldn't be in the journal? So we talked about what we want. It's as important to talk about what we don't want. Because the chances are you're going to get a lot more of what you don't want than what you do want. At least the first time someone writes a journal.
Yeah.
Look, I can't remember anybody that's ever written an awesome journal one time. I'm sure it's happened. I just don't have any recollection of it. So in other words, what we're talking about right now is something you should expect. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, here's what shouldn't be in the journal. Why they used. Now that sounds kind of like, it's kind of crazy. I mean, why you use, that's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, that's kind of fundamental to the whole thing. Don't you want to know why I did all of this craziness? I mean, you just want the details? I mean, at least give me an opportunity to explain why I did all this. I mean, come on, we're all about why, aren't we? Oh, look, hon, I would have been there. I mean, but let me tell you why I wasn't there on time. I mean, I'm all about excuses and giving you explanations so you have a larger view of why I failed to do the things I said I was going to do. We don't want that. Why they use is at this point in the addict's recovery, the why is not important. Ultimately, what we're interested in this journal is a journal that makes a clear case that drug and alcohol use is no longer a viable option for the addict. So what we're really interested in here is then making the connection that using drugs and alcohol can no longer be part of their life. Why will not help them get to that point.
Right.
Yeah, Darryl.
Early in recovery, the why can change very easily. You know, why I use changed on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment.
Right.
The good day I used, the bad day I used.
Right.
Didn't have either one. It was used. It was Groundhog Day.
Right. No, that's a big one. Groundhog Day is a big one. Never like to miss that one myself. I mean, look, there's a million reasons to use, right? I used when I was really happy. I got great news, got a raise. I used when I got fired. It was an awful day. I mean, you
Got fired because I used?
you used
That one.
you used because you wanted to, right? Well, that's probably the single greatest reason why we use, right? So let's just cut through all of it. Like it says, look, cutting through the fluff. I use because I want to use. We want to get rid of blame shifting.
Yes.
All right. I mean, blame shifting again is very closely linked to making excuses. All right. This idea of excusing your conduct, excusing your behavior. What we're really interested in are details. We're not interested in any kind of explanations. And blame shifting is part of an explanation. I don't want an explanation. There will be a time in a person's recovery when the circumstances in which they found themselves, the circumstances perhaps that they grew up in someone's recovery, there comes a time when that's something you need to start thinking about. Because we do have baggage. All right? We've got all kinds of baggage. Maybe you grew up in a home that was totally dysfunctional. You know? Maybe you had some horrendous things happen to you when you were a younger person. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in people's lives. But for this stage, when someone is trying to stop using drugs and alcohol, that's not important. That will only confuse and complicate the whole process of trying to help them understand really one thing and one thing alone. And that is, I can't use anymore. And as simple a concept as it is for us this morning, sitting in a nice warm room with some coffee and muffins, it's impossible to make that connection when you're in the fog of using drugs. The idea that I have got to stop, I can't do this anymore, is a hard-fought concept to come to terms with. And that's the only thing we're interested in the journal, is helping somebody come to that realization. I am done. I can't do this anymore. All right, we don't want the narrative, the fluff, right? So we don't want anybody to use any clever writing techniques. We've covered this. Not interested in your you're an English major. So what? Like I care about that. I care about the fact that you can't write. I can't write. Well, give it a best shot. Let us decide that you can't write. Oh, you were right. You couldn't write. I mean, let us make that decision. All you need to do is come in here with an open heart, willingness to change, and we'll take it from there. What we don't want is slang terms for drugs. We don't want unnecessary sexual references or other types of glorification. I mean, we know the deal here. In our groups, we don't allow slang terminology, right? In the CR group, we don't allow people to use words like blow, right? I don't even want to hear the word weed. The reason we don't want to hear that is because there's a certain glamour, there's a certain glorification associated with referring to these deathly substances that we have abused in some sort of positive sense. There's nothing great about marijuana. It turns you into a mushroom. There's nothing great about mushrooms. They turn you into something else. I mean, look, drugs destroy people's lives. And so anything that makes it seem less than that, we want to get rid of it. I don't want to hear somebody talking about how much money they made when they were dealing drugs. Now, I know you've never heard that before. What did Harry say? He used to call me Diablo, yo. Yeah. No, El Diablo. It's like, it's like, what's this, Carlito's Way, It's like, we don't want to hear that stuff, man. I mean, you might be a legend in your own mind, but for the rest of us, we heard it all before. It's no biggie. It's no biggie in a room full of people that have all come the same way. You're not impressing anybody here, and we don't want you to impress yourself. Because there's nothing impressive about who you are. Let me tell you something. If you were all of that, you wouldn't be sitting here today with all of us, reading this sorry, soppy story, which is your life. Darryl, what were you going to say?
The other thing about slang terms is they're like endearments.
Mm.
You know, and so a recent epiphany to it, you know, if I broke up with someone, it would be really inappropriate for me to still call that person honey pie, sweetie, and all those other things. And in the same way, to use those same endearments for drugs and alcohol is also equally inappropriate.
Mm. Well, now, if you were still calling somebody honey pie or sweetie pie, not that I don't think I've ever called my wife honey pie or sweetie pie, but anyway, if that's your preferred MO, and you broke up with them and you were still calling them that, what would that indicate? You were still in love with them, right? You still have a relationship.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. Let it be duly noted that Darrell Enfield Smith made a really, really good point this morning. Look, I mean, when you start and think about this, when you get inside, there's all kinds of good reasons for the things that we believe. Because what we believe is true. This is not opinion. And I think you need to be very clear about that. Well, that's just your opinion. I'm sorry. This is reality. This is not just opinion. This is reality. There is no other way for us to come to terms with the truth. All right. So, reading the CR journal. Okay, so obviously, someone's going to sit down, they're going to write this journal, they're going to be instructed as to what's in that journal. They're going to, in one sitting, hopefully, sit down and write that journal according to the instructions, and then they're going to bring the journal into the group. They're going to sit down with the group, and they're going to read that journal. Now, this is part and parcel of this whole process of coming to terms, hitting bottom. And so I wouldn't minimize the significance of the reading the journal component here to all of this. So, we want to prepare everyone in the group for what is about to happen. There may be people in that room that don't know anything about a journal. It's the first time they've come out. And they're saying to themselves, I mean, what's about to happen? What is this? Now, I've heard all kinds of people make comments about reading the journal. And I don't want to read the journal in front of these guys. I don't even know this guy. Or I don't even want to read the journal in front of people who I can trust. Right? I mean, some of this stuff sounds pretty legit. But I want you to think about when you use drugs. When I use drugs, I almost, without fail, never went round the room to make sure I knew the names of the other people I was using drugs with.
Right.
I mean, that's just me. And I did use drugs in mixed company, just so you know. I very often used drugs with people that, up until very recently, I wouldn't have been really comfortable being seen on the street with. Right. But all of a sudden, we're bosom buddies because we're all getting high together. And you are now my brother.
It's true.
All right? We become bosom buddies sitting up there smoking and all the other stuff that we were doing.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of I'm concerned about the people that are going to hear my journal, you've got to keep that in context. And the other thing about confidentiality, our groups are confidential. All right, that means what's said in that room stays in that room. It's one of our rules, and it's a rule that we must enforce vigorously. That it's a safe place. When somebody comes in, they believe, and not without good reason, that what's said in that room is going to stay there. They are not afraid that somebody's going to run out of there and start blabbing the things that were said in that room. Okay? Now, there are all kinds of things associated with this that I'm not going to get into here, things that have come up in the last few years with regards to certain kinds of activities people have been involved in. That's why we want to keep the journal to really what you used, what happened, how did you feel. I don't want you talking about incidences of you getting into sexual circumstances with anybody, lest we hear about a minor or we hear about something else that a mandated reporter in this room is going to end up having to say, I have to report this. So when you limit that journal to what you used, what happened, how did you feel, you're on far more solid ground. So we need to remind the group what we're listening for, right? Everybody in the room needs to know what we just covered. We don't want to hear embellishment. We don't want to hear fluff. We don't want to hear glorification. I want to hear the truth. I want to hear facts, specifics, details, all of the stuff that I can imagine I would not want to write. Okay, so if we can help people to recognize that, what should be in a journal? The stuff you don't want to write. The kind of things that you do not want to talk about. That's what should be in the journal. So if everyone sitting in that room is relating to themselves and saying, I would never talk about that, that's probably something that's identifying a good journal. If somebody sits in the room and says, there's nothing that I heard in that journal that made me feel uncomfortable, it's probably not a very good journal. Does that make sense? We should squirm a little bit when somebody reads their journal. We should feel a little embarrassed about some of the things that they're talking about, because it is embarrassing stuff. Drugs puts you in all kinds of embarrassing situations, day after day after day after day. We want the journal to be read exactly as it's written. I mean, I can't tell you how many times somebody is reading their journal and they go from the reading voice to the, and so then after that I decided that I was going to, do this or do that, and you can tell their voice has changed, that they're no longer reading, or they're starting to add, little sections, little segments into what they've written to try and make it sound better. We don't want that. You should have written that. If there's something that should be in there that's not in there, it's too late now. We want you to read what's written. So you need to make sure that the person who's reading the journal understands that, and everybody else is attentive, listening for that. I think it's fine for somebody who's reading a journal to feel a little uneasy. These guys are listening. I want them to feel like I can't break one of the rules here by reading saying something that's not on the journal. I want them to feel uncomfortable to some degree with regards to that. The group should be attentive. If you see somebody sleeping, help them out. If you see them nodding out, help them out. The last thing in the world we want is for somebody to spend a day and a night writing a journal, putting down the worst things that have ever happened to them in their life, and they look over there and Willie's nodding out.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's all wrong.
Yep.
Yeah, it's true.
So it's up to us to make sure that everybody in that room, no matter how long it is, no matter how boring it is, some of these things get really boring, man. Doesn't matter. You need to be awake and attentive and give that person the very best that you have.
Right.
You need to give them all of your attention.
Amen.
We don't want to see anyone taking notes. Now, that might seem like a no-brainer, but it's happened. Where people are sitting there, well-meaning, they're not like journalists, and this will be in the paper tomorrow. Yeah, how did you? I mean, that's not what we're talking about. But people take notes. Oh yeah, I must remember to follow up with him on this. Oh, didn't know about this. We should expound on this later on. No. If you can't remember it, then leave it alone.
Right.
We don't want people keeping records of the kinds of things people write in their journals. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it has happened. Okay, responding to the journal. So after somebody has written their journal, they follow the instructions, they bring it in, they sit down, they read the journal, everybody listens attentively, listening for the kinds of things that we've discussed, we've covered, the blame shifting, the excuse making, the details, the facts, the specifics, all of that. Then the group gets an opportunity to respond to that journal. And it's a feedback. So the person's read their journal, we thank them for reading the journal, we let them know we really appreciate it, because we do. It's not a throwaway statement. It's a big deal.
It is.
It takes an incredible amount of fortitude to do this.
Right.
So when somebody says, I'm going to write that journal, and they do, we let them know that we appreciate it. Then we ask them, do they want to get some feedback? Well, this is kind of like a funny question, because we are planning on giving them feedback. Right? We're planning on giving them feedback, but we want to give them the honor of asking them, are they willing to get some feedback? So after they've given us permission to give them feedback, what we want to hear from the group is really one thing more than anything else. What's that? Relating.
Relatability. Yes.
You see, here's what never helped me one bit. People preaching at me. You know, my mother preached at me when I was drinking that can of Heineken. She didn't know I was drinking Heineken. She was preaching about something else. But that it doesn't impact you. Particularly when you get older. Look, you know, you're 40, you're 50, you're 25, whatever it is, being preached at doesn't connect with you the same way being related to does.
True.
When somebody says, you see when you talked about not paying your Con Ed bill and taking the money that your wife had given you to pay the Con Ed bill and you went and you got all cracked up? See when you wrote that part in your journal? I can relate to that. I did the same thing. Do you know what just happened right there? I just bonded with you. I just connected with you in a really personal way. Now all of a sudden I'm down in the pit with you. No one's standing at the mouth of the pit looking down and saying, oh, look at you, you sorry sack of you-know-what, spending the Con Ed money. We're saying, yeah, we've been down there too. We're in that sack with you. We've done the same thing. So as people go around the room and give their input, we want people to identify with their experiences. There is nothing that you will hear in a journal that you can identify with on some level.
That's right. That's right.
I only smoked cigarettes. His journal was about heroin. That's not true. You can identify with somebody who has used heroin even if you've only smoked cigarettes. If you can't, you really haven't spent any time thinking about what it was like to be addicted to smoking cigarettes.
Right. Amen.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
People need to understand the power of empathy.
Yep.
Empathy demolishes all kinds of walls, tears down strongholds. Sounds familiar?
Yep.
Empathy is a powerful tool. I loved what Darrell said in his Devo about Jesus identifying with the rich young ruler. Jesus never committed a sin. And yet he was able to identify as a human being
Yep.
with temptations.
Yep.
There's so much power in saying, I am like you. Because you're not on your own. Let's lift each other up together instead of you being the crippled basket case who can't be reached, which is how you feel when you're out there.
Right. True.
You feel like you're totally unique. And you're not. You're just like everybody else who's sitting in this room. And all that stuff's in your head. So you want to make sure that everybody relates in the first person, me. Be clear and concise in your feedback. Look, this means different things to different people. All right? Everybody has got varying degrees of comprehension. They've got different cognitive abilities. So that when people talk, they may hit it right on the mark. They may be a little to the left, a little to the right. That's all good. As long as they are making a 100% effort to relate to somebody. Because here's the deal. Over the years, I have heard some folks who maybe weren't the sharpest tool in the rack give some of the best input
Yeah. That's right.
in a journal. Because in their heart, they were really on point.
Sure.
They may not have had all of the mental facility that some of the other people in the room had, but they were more honest.
Yeah.
Yes.
And here's the big one. The Spirit spoke through them. And when we sit in our rooms, this is not a human movement, folks.
Right.
We're not doing something on the basis of how clever and how smart we are, or how great our program is, or on anything else. We are depending upon God and His Holy Spirit to meet the needs of this person that we're here trying to help.
Yep.
That's really what's happening. All of the other stuff, it's kind of helpful, but without God's Spirit, it's going to accomplish nothing. It's just a human work. And so when people make every effort to put themselves in that spiritual space of connecting empathetically, I really believe that God's Spirit flows through the whole process.
Amen.
And really helps people in a way that goes beyond even our expectations. It goes beyond our words. It goes beyond our descriptions. You know, when the Bible says that the Spirit intercedes for us with
Yes.
groans and moans. What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. Spirit groaning and moaning. I mean, what is that? Obviously, it's got something to do with the Spirit's role in each one of our lives, going before God.
Amen.
And so I really do think that this is a time of great reverence and a time of great spiritual activity. We need to be sensitive to that.
Amen.
We need to be honest, right? People need to tell the truth in that room. It's kind of a fundamental component here. People need to be honest. Don't tell somebody what you think they want to hear. I mean, Darrell said something about earlier, referring to your wonderful work, your great Devo, Darrell, all the time here. Was that impacting, man? But Darrell talked about the sharp young guy with the suit and the tie, right? And how we can get intimidated. I've seen people come into the room in the shirt and tie, and people were intimidated. And maybe they didn't tell them what they needed to hear. Because they thought, well, I can't talk to this guy the way I might talk to that guy over there who doesn't have the shirt and tie on. Now that's a big problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's true.
Because if somebody's sitting in that room, it doesn't matter what they look like. They're there for the same reason you're there.
Yep.
Sure.
They are your brother.
Amen.
Now, here I want to talk a little bit about this. This whole business of rewriting the journal. Yeah, see some smiles out there, right? Rewriting the journal. Those of us who've been around for a little while have seen that concept, in my opinion, run amok. Where I see people writing journals 7, 8. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Yeah, he's on his 6th journal. Listen, when somebody is asked to rewrite the journal, there are specific instructions that are given. In other words, I really appreciate your journal. I'm grateful for the amount of time you took in writing this, but I didn't hear enough pain, particularly surrounding this incident. Or I didn't hear any really difficult events, the kinds of things that I know happened to me. I got DWI'd, I ran people over, I did this, I broke into house. I mean, whatever your stuff is, people have got those kinds of episodes. Going to a party, making a total fool of yourself, throwing all up over the floor, everybody going, who brought him? Get him out of here. You think you forget that? Heck no, that's buried out in the backyard. That's the kind of stuff that we want to get into. When you suggest you want to rewrite, you want somebody to rewrite their journal, it needs to be with those kinds of specific instructions. If they come in and they haven't done it, then you need to spend some time talking about why. Maybe you need to back off. Let's just leave it for a little while. Let's just see if you really are that willing to do what we're talking about. See, when someone writes journal after journal after journal, what you're actually doing is you're minimizing the value of the journal. You're turning it into some sort of exercise, and that's not that. Somebody has to be willing to do this. They have to be willing to put their best effort forth. Look, it's not uncommon for people to need some help in terms of fine-tuning, getting to the details. That's not uncommon. We all know that. But when somebody can't do that over a prolonged period, there's something else missing. So we don't need to have people writing journal after journal after journal, expecting somehow, magically, they're going to get to this place that they're unwilling to get to. The willingness is what must be there. If it's not there, repetitively writing journals is not going to help them get there. So we do need to give people input in terms of rewriting their journal. I would probably at this stage leave that up to probably some of the more mature brothers or sisters in your group. If the guy who just walked in, he's been at 2 groups and he goes, I think you should rewrite that journal, I'd say, scratch that. Pay no attention to the man sitting in the corner in the grey suit. What's your name again? All right? Everyone has an opinion, but not everyone's opinion is equal. And don't be afraid to say that in the room. Right? Our rooms are, above all, real. Right? And so not everybody's advice and input is equal. Don't be afraid to say, brother, I appreciate your heart saying that, but that's crap. We don't need to listen to that. That doesn't make any sense, what this guy just said. we want to try and keep the input moving. We don't want people repeating the same input over and over and over. Sometimes people feel like they need to give input because they're sitting in the room. If you don't have anything to say, unfortunately, you should have something to say, but if you don't have anything to say, don't just repeat what the guy before you just said, so you've got something to say. Or add a few bells and whistles to make it sound like it's different. We need to train people to be able to think. Look, see what Darrell did a while ago when he was able to think outside the box on the rich young ruler and being able to connect to using slang terms. That's what we need to be able. We need to allow the Spirit to work through us. We've got lots of input to give. There are all kinds of things that you can share in that room. But if people aren't thinking creatively, if they're not allowing God's Spirit to speak through them, then they just start mimicking what they heard somebody else say. We don't want that.
Right.
We want people to really become sharp tools in the box. And finally, look, if for some reason you run out of time in the group, and that can happen, and people didn't get to share, encourage them that they need to share after the group. Amen? All right, so that is the journal. It's by no means an exhaustive look at the journal. We're kind of just skimming over it. There's a whole lot more we could get into in terms of specific components of the journal. But that kind of gives us an overview. We'll take a few minutes, questions. Yeah, we've got some time for some questions and answers.